German authors, the Brothers Grimm's Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel is a classic fairy tale that has been loved all over the world for a very long time. As we already know, it is a story about a brother and a sister abandoned in a forest as a result of their stepmother's scheme, where they fell into the hands of a witch, survived dramatically, and lived happily ever after. There is a hypothesis that the fairy tale was actually written based on real-life events. A terrible incident, to be exact. In 1962, a teacher named Georg Osseg decided to perform a research on fairy tales, particularly Hansel and Gretel. He had a strong intuition that the story is based on real-life events. Osseg then began investigating various medieval German literature and records to prove his hypothesis. Upon discovering the fact that the forest in the story, Spessart Forest, is called the Witch's Forest by locals, Osseg was headed directly to the area for further investigation. He wanted to find the siblings' house with the story as the only basis. The wife said, "Fool, that is not your little cat. That is the morning sun which is shining on the chimneys." The fact that the house looked like backlight in the morning sun means the house is located in the east, which is the same direction as the sun. Having combined all the minor information scattered throughout the story, Osseg wandered through Spessart Forest in search of the siblings' house. However, it led to nothing but frustration. That was because a road was built in the area presumed to be the house's location. Nevertheless, he did not give up. Osseg then visited the Freiburg Road Construction Company to look into the records from November 4th, 1954, the date before the road was built. He discovered payment records to compensate the demolition of the wooden house. Assuming that it was indeed the siblings' house, he performed an experiment to find the witch's house by filling an 8-year-old boy's pockets with pebbles and having him walk into the woods, dropping them along the way. But even after several experiments, all he could see was nothing but forest scenery that was entirely different from what was described in the story. Ultimately, Osseg decided to repeat the experiment himself, and surprisingly, he was able to find the actual empty lot as mentioned in the story. Based on the fact that the empty lot was found after having an adult perform the experiment, Osseg concluded that both Hansel and Gretel were not children, but rather adults. He began searching through the woods surrounding the empty lot, then discovered used baking ovens, various cutlery, and remains that appeared to be a woman's. The terrifying thing was the remains he discovered inside one of the baking ovens. After commissioning a detailed analysis on the remains, it was revealed that the owner was a woman in her late 20s with the height of approximately 167 centimeters. Feeling such joy for a moment over his discovery, Osseg felt a strange sense of discrepancy between the actual evidence he had discovered and what was described in the story. The fact that one of the door hinges in the witch's house seemed to have been forcefully broken by someone was a deciding factor. For further investigation, Osseg dug into the Wernigerode archives. He found a manuscript describing the trial of Katharina Schraderin, the Baker Witch. The following is what was said in the manuscript about Hansel and Gretel. Germany, 1638. Harz district, Wernigerode town. Katharina Schraderin was the youngest nun to work in the kitchen of Quedlinburg Abbey. Born with a talent for baking, she dreamed of becoming a baker. At the young age of around 16, she invented her famous gingerbread-like treat called Lebkuchen. The pepper-flavored treat was extremely popular, that it was called the most delicious treat in the Nuremberg market at the time. The rumors spread quickly, reaching the ears of Hans Metzler, the court baker of Brandenburg. Hans visited Katharina's bakery to taste the gingerbread himself. Impressed by the taste, he tried to come up with a plan, and that was marrying Katharina in order to steal the gingerbread recipe. Having been in a slump as a court baker, he thought that acquiring the recipe would be a great opportunity for him to establish his position in the court. He immediately put his plan into practice and proposed to Katharina. He was rejected, as she obviously would not accept a sudden confession from a man she had never seen before. Hans stayed persistent and visited the bakery every day to propose to her. Katharina eventually fled to the forest at night, taking her baking tools with her. The reason was because she was afraid of Hans, an upper-class noble who worked in the court, taking his revenge after she turned him down. She hid in an empty house on Engelsberg Hill in Spessart Forest, and continued to do so until she heard nothing from Hans. During her disappearance, Katharina spent her time studying recipes to make even more delicious cookies. And as a result, she succeeded in making much softer and sweeter ones compared to her original Lebkuchen. As she stopped hearing news about Hans, she started constructing baking ovens, allowing her to bake and sell cookies again. The Lebkuchen was much tastier than before, resulting in the spread of Katharina's reputation. Of course, this eventually reached Hans's ears. Feeling extremely jealous over Katharina's success, Hans made a change of plans. He took the matter to the municipal court and accused her of witchcraft. At the time, witch hunt was so severe to the point where any slight accusation could lead to the accused woman being buried in public, or even worse, losing their lives. Hans convinced the court that Katharina was a witch and that she was able to gain popularity and earn money by putting spells on her cookies. On July 15, 1647, Katharina was brought to Gelnhausen for her trial. Despite being tortured, she insisted on her innocence until the end and stated that she was framed by Hans, the court baker. Since she denied being a witch even after hours of torture, the prosecutors had no choice but to release her. Upon hearing about Katharina accusing him during her trial, Hans was livid. And one night, Hans, accompanied by his younger sister, Grete, decided to pay Katharina a visit. Katharina was baking cookies at home before the Metzler siblings strangled her and put her body in one of the baking ovens, destroying evidence of the murder. The siblings proceeded to search the whole house to find the Lebkuchen recipe, but to no avail. This recipe, by the way, was later discovered by Osseg in a small secret place inside the house. The rumor about the famous baker Katharina's death quickly spread throughout the town. And of course, Hans was interrogated as a suspect as he was the one accusing her of witchcraft in the first place. But unfortunately, he was released due to insufficient evidence. Osseg claimed that this series of events occurring in medieval Germany was the real motif behind the fairy tale. He stated that the title of the fairy tale should have been Hans and Gretel instead of Hansel and Gretel, and that the witch was not a cannibalistic evil villain, but an unjustly murdered victim. Moreover, he also stated that the story was either misrepresented through the word of mouth, or the brothers Grimm had deliberately changed the contents to suit the fairy tale narrative. Osseg went as far as publishing a book based on his research, in hopes of spreading the truth behind Hansel and Gretel. However, there were mixed responses. People were saying that since everything was done by one person, the entire thing could be mere fiction or lies made up by Osseg. And perhaps for this reason, the public dismissed Osseg's claims as nothing but a parody of the fairy tale itself. Old fairy tales may contain stories that are quite different from what we are familiar to. They are even called dark fairy tales because they are too brutal, and they contain too many raw depictions for children to read. Most fairy tales passed down orally have their own roots or events as motifs. Well then, maybe Hans was actually Hansel's real name. This has been Strange Night.